I was only 18 when my life changed forever. I still remember the first time I stepped into the Eduardo's grand mansion. I was nothing more than a shadow trailing behind my father, Mr. Cortei, the once trusted treasurer of the mighty Eduardo Empire. For years he served the family with loyalty, or so I thought. The Eduardo family was wealth itself. A legacy built on oil, tech, and sheer brilliance. The name was powerful enough to open any door, shake entire markets, and crush enemies without lifting a finger. My father had always warned me to tread carefully around them. But even he wasn't careful enough. It all started when small amounts of money went missing from random accounts. At first no one noticed. But Mrs. Rodriguez did. She was sharp like that, the kind of woman who smiled with her lips but measured your soul with her eyes. She brought in a forensic financial expert. Every expense, every wire transfer, every invoice, nothing escaped the scrutiny. And there it was, like blood on white linen, a trail of missing funds. Over $500,000, gone. They traced it back to my father. I remember the day they dragged him to the private dungeon beneath the estate. It wasn't the screaming that haunted me. It was the silence. The way he accepted his fate like a dog caught stealing from its master. They didn't call the police. They handled things their own way, the Eduardo way. And in their world, what happens inside the mansion stays within. Mrs. Rodriguez had him thrown into the stone-cold dungeon beneath their estate, where the light of day never reached. I tried to run away that night, but I didn't get far. They caught me, of course. And instead of throwing me in the same hellhole, they chose something different. They kept me. I remember standing before Mrs. Rodriguez. Her dark wine-colored dress clinging to her like royalty, a single diamond hanging from her neck. She looked me up and down as though I were an object. "You're young," she said finally, "and beautiful enough to be useful." And just like that, my freedom vanished. Then James returned. He was the true owner of everything. Rumor said he was only 14 when his father died, leaving him and his twin sister, Jane, to face a world filled with vultures and false friends. But James? He was different. Where others would crumble, he built an empire from the ashes. By the time he was 20, men twice his age begged to invest in his vision. And before he clocked 30, he was already a billionaire, who owned not just companies but people. 4 years. That's how long I had been surviving inside the golden cage known as the Eduardo Mansion. From the outside, it looked like paradise. A sprawling estate lined with white roses, carved marble pillars, crystal chandeliers, and the scent of imported lavender lingering in every hallway. But for me it was nothing but a glittering prison, and I was its most invisible inmate. I had begged them. On my knees, face smeared with tears and dust, I had offered my freedom in exchange for my father's life. That day still haunted me. I remember Mrs. Rodriguez standing at the top of the stairs like some cold goddess, her expression unreadable. "You want him alive?" she had said. "Then pay with your life." 10 years. That was the price she put on my back. 10 years of servitude. She wasn't short of staff, of course. In fact, she had more than 50 well-paid uniformed workers running every inch of her empire. But she didn't need another worker. She only accepted my plea because of the crime my father committed. She needed someone to bear the shame. A breathing debt she could watch suffer every single day. And so, I became that reminder. I trimmed every hedge in the massive gardens until my palms blistered and bled. I scrubbed marble floors that seemed to stretch endlessly, my knees aching on cold stone. I served Mrs. Rodriguez her morning tea and listened as she ignored my presence completely, treating me like I was the heir, useful but invisible. Some nights, when the house went quiet, I would sneak into the dungeon just to hear if my father was still breathing. The guard always let me in. He pitied me, I think. But even pity couldn't make the chains any lighter. James had spoken once, only once. He told his mother to accept my service. Said I should be allowed to pay off my father's debt the only way I could. Then he left. He packed his things, said nothing to me, and left for Europe to finish his third degree. His third. Because James Rodriguez Eduardo wasn't just a billionaire, he was a prodigy. Everything he touched turned to gold. And while the world praised him, I was back here polishing the floors he once walked on. I hadn't seen him in years. But today the house was buzzing. "The young master is returning," I heard one maid whisper to another while folding sheets. "He'll be back tomorrow," the other giggled. Can you believe it? After 4 whole years. I heard he's taller now, even more handsome. His jawline could slice paper. They giggled again. I kept walking past them, bucket in hand, ignoring the excited chatter. It wasn't like they were talking to me anyway. James' return didn't excite me. If anything, it made my skin crawl. From what I remembered, he was just an upgraded version of his mother, cold and precise, dangerous without raising his voice. A man of control. A man who saw people as tools. And I was just one of his broken screwdrivers. It was 3 p.m., my only hour of rest. I sat behind the greenhouse, my back pressed against the ivy-covered wall. The sun filtered softly through the glass, warming my face. My body ached, but I wasn't sure if it was from labor or the weight of time. 6 more years. That was what remained of my sentence. 6 long years of being the invisible boy who did everything and received nothing. I couldn't remember what it felt like to be hugged, or to be seen as someone worth caring about. I tilted my head back and stared at the sky. Would my father still be alive by the end of this? The truth was, I didn't know. All I knew was that tomorrow the man of the house was coming back. And my life was about to shift again, one way or another. The night before his return, no one in the mansion slept. Not even me. The floors had to shine like mirrors. The chandeliers needed to twinkle like stars. Every corner was dusted, every statue polished. The air was soaked in the scent of roses imported from Italy and perfumes that cost more than I could ever imagine. The maids buzzed around like bees, their voices echoing down the long halls. I worked alongside them, silent as always. Scrubbing, lifting, folding, and fixing. My fingers felt like they would fall off by dawn, but I didn't complain. I never did. When the sun rose, the mansion looked like a palace from a fairy tale. And by afternoon, the guests started to arrive. Big names, powerful men and elegant women in glittering gowns. The Eduardo mansion became the center of the world for one evening. I stayed far from them. I knew better. The rich didn't want to see someone like me. I kept to the shadows, making myself as invisible as I could. That evening, James Rodriguez Eduardo returned. I didn't see him, but I felt it. The atmosphere shifted. Conversations hushed, and the air grew tighter, like it had to make room for someone bigger. I didn't even try to catch a glimpse of him. And still I stayed hidden. I wasn't part of their world. I was a prisoner. The next day was worse. The maids couldn't stop talking about him. Oh my God, did you see his jawline? He's literally the most handsome man I have ever seen. One maid said. I heard he told one of the butlers to redo the wine shelf because the label wasn't facing forward. Who even notices that? He's strict, but God, he's so hot. Their voices trailed through the hallways like perfume, sickly sweet and annoying. But I didn't care. I was exhausted. Mentally, physically, and emotionally. I didn't care if James had wings and flew to work. I just wanted to sleep, to rest and to be free. But fate wasn't done with me. Around noon, Mrs. Rodriguez summoned me. I knew the place, her visitors' quarters. I had polished those gold-framed walls 100 times. My palms began to sweat. I had no idea why she was calling me, but I knew better than to keep her waiting. I pushed the heavy door open, and stopped. There he was, standing by the wide windows, dressed in a black silk shirt. His dark hair was slicked back, and his features were sharp, untouched by time. He was in his early 30s now, but he looked like he hadn't aged a day since he left. Still young and handsome, but dude is 8 years older than I am. My heart skipped, then dropped. I looked down. James? Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice smooth. This is Jake. The boy who offered his life in exchange for his father's. The room was heavy with silence. I didn't dare look up. My knees trembled. Not from fear, but something deeper. Something I didn't want to name. He's still here? James's voice was deeper now. Smoother and deadly calm. It's been 4 years and you're still working your ass off to save a man who ruined your life. He walked slowly toward me. Each step rang through the room. I could feel his presence, heavy, commanding, impossible to ignore. When he stood just inches away, I finally glanced up. And there it was again. That look in his eyes. Not pity. Not hatred. Just cold, piercing curiosity. He tilted his head slightly. I suppose loyalty is your only currency now. he said quietly. I didn't answer. What could I say? That I wanted to scream? That I wanted to run? That every second in that house felt like drowning in silence? He turned away from me, then walking back to the window. Mrs. Rodriguez said nothing. The moment passed like a storm cloud rolling by. But something inside me had shifted. James was back. And even though he barely looked at me, I could feel it. My story wasn't going to stay quiet for much longer. The morning air felt heavier than usual. Something was off. I was barely done scrubbing the east wing stairs when a maid came rushing toward me, her heels clacking against the marble floor like gunshots. Mrs. Rodriguez says you should take the master his morning tea, she said quickly, not even looking me in the eye. My stomach flipped. James had a dozen butlers, all well trained in how he liked his meals. I had never attended to him directly, not once in 4 years. Not even when he visited years ago before leaving for Europe. So why now? I wiped my hands on my worn-out apron, headed to the kitchen, and tried not to let the fear get to me. I prepared the tea exactly how the maids described he liked it, black with a hint of sugar and a drop of lemon. I used the porcelain set with the golden handles just like I was taught. My hands trembled as I carried the tray down the hall to his room. The door to his room stood tall and intimidating. I took a deep breath and knocked gently. Come in. His voice replied, deep and smooth. I froze. For a second I considered turning back. But it was too late. I pushed the door open slowly, the scent of expensive cologne and steam washing over me. And there he was. Just stepping out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, hair dripping wet, like some sculpted statue that had come to life. His skin glistened under the warm glow of the chandelier. My throat dried up instantly. I had never seen someone look that effortlessly perfect. I quickly lowered my eyes. Good morning, sir, I muttered. He gave a small nod, drying his hair as he crossed the room. I moved quickly to place the tea on the table beside the velvet chaise lounge. But he moved toward me. Not in a rush, not aggressive. Just deliberate. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. He picked up the cup, brought it to his lips, and sipped. Then his brows furrowed slightly. It's not sweet enough, he said. Use honey, not sugar. That was it. No anger. No yelling. Just a calm, cold instruction. I nodded, bowed quickly, and took the tray. I returned to the kitchen, remade the tea with honey, and added a slice of lemon for balance. Every second felt like an hour. When I returned, he was already dressed in a sleek black designer suit, white shirt open just enough to show the hint of a silver chain at his neck. He sat in front of a mahogany desk, flipping through a document with focused ease. He didn't look up when I entered. I placed the tea down quietly, hoping I could leave without another word. But then, just as I turned to go, I heard his voice from behind. I froze and turned slowly. I stood near the door like a statue, hands behind me, trying to pretend my heart wasn't pounding. I let my eyes drift around the room, the towering bookshelves, the massive abstract painting on the wall, the tall mirror catching a glimpse of both of us. But my gaze betrayed me. It landed on him again. His perfectly sharp jawline. And then he caught me staring. Our eyes locked. Just for a second. I quickly looked down. He smirked. That same cocky, effortless smirk I had only heard about in whispers from the other staff. He stood up, holding the teacup in his hand. His footsteps drew closer, slow and calculated, like he was inspecting something. And then he scanned me. From my frayed collar to my worn-out shoes. I suddenly felt smaller than I'd ever felt before. Like a bug under a microscope. You should dress better, he said. At least when you're serving me. And just like that, he waved his hand, signaling me to leave. I bowed again. And walked out, carefully holding my breath until I was a good 10 feet away from his room. The hallway felt colder and more quiet. I walked back toward the servants' quarters with thoughts running through my mind like wildfire. Why was he so concerned about my clothes? Why had he looked at me like that? And most of all, what was I supposed to wear? I didn't have money for clothes. I had no salary. No allowance. Just second-hand shirts donated by staff who pitied me. And yet the man who had every luxury in life expected me to show up looking better. Maybe he wanted everyone around him to reflect his status. Or maybe he just enjoyed reminding me how different our worlds were. Still, something about the way he looked at me stayed in my head longer than it should have. And that smirk? God, I hated how much it lingered. The morning sun filtered through the thick patterned drapes of the hallway window as I stood still, broom in hand, watching the luxury black car roll out through the golden gates. James was off to work. I didn't even realize I was staring until a voice beside me brought me back. If you keep looking like that, the wind might carry your soul to him. It was Miriam. The only one in the entire mansion who still spoke to me like I mattered. I turned to her, startled, then smiled. "Good morning, Miriam," I muttered. She folded her arms, tilting her head slightly, her headscarf swaying gently as she stepped closer. She had always carried a soft presence with her, kind eyes, warm hands, and a motherly instinct that soothed the harshness of this mansion. "What is it with that look?" she teased gently. "Looking at the master like that." I shrugged, trying not to smile too much. "Nothing. Just curious," I said. "He's hard to read." Miriam chuckled softly and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Don't stare for too long, Jake. And don't let Madam catch you either. She'd skin your eyes and wear them as earrings." I let out a faint laugh, the first real one in days. But the moment passed too quickly. The smile faded, and I returned to sweeping the already gleaming floor, my mind elsewhere. By evening, the cold breeze swept through the open courtyard, rustling the palace-sized drapes and carrying the scent of jasmine around the mansion. The maids had all lined up at the entrance, practically bouncing on their feet, ready to welcome the return of their master. And then the engine purred at the gate. James Rodriguez was home. He stepped out of the car, tall and unreadable, his leather shoes tapped against the marble pathway with each slow, calculated step. The maids straightened their backs, ready to grab his briefcase and earn his approval. But James didn't even glance their way. Instead, his eyes scanned the courtyard, until they landed on me. I was down on my knees, scrubbing the floor by the stairs. My heart stuttered when I felt his steps approach. He stopped right beside me, then let the black leather bag fall to the floor beside my bucket. "Bring it to my room," he said simply. No eye contact, no emotion. And then he walked off. The maids stared at me, their faces twisted with shock, envy, and disappointment. One even scoffed. But I didn't care. I picked up the bag, bowed slightly, and walked silently to the master's suite. Inside he was already there. Loosening his tie, removing his cufflinks, and pacing slowly across the room like a king back in his lair. I bowed deeply. "Welcome back, sir." "Close the door properly," he replied. I did, nervously. He pulled out his phone, made a brief call, and within minutes, a male servant arrived with a sleek black box and placed it on a table before hurrying out. James walked over to the box, opened it, and took out a sealed package, then extended it toward me. "Try them on." I blinked. "Sir?" He said nothing, just stared. I opened the package slowly, and my breath caught. Inside were luxury clothes. A soft white shirt with fine embroidery, trousers, and polished loafers. The fabric alone looked really expensive. "I'm scared to wear these," I muttered honestly. "If Madam sees me..." That was a mistake. James's eyes darkened. "Who is the man of this house?" he asked, voice low and commanding. I dropped to my knees, heart racing. "Forgive me, sir. I didn't mean to offend you." He didn't shout. He didn't repeat himself. The room thickened with tension until he turned away and casually waved me off. "Leave, and wear one of the outfits. Serve me dinner by 10. That was unusual. He always ate by 7. Everyone knew that. But I didn't question it. I bowed low again, hands still trembling, and left the room with the clothes pressed tightly against my chest. As I walked back to the servants' quarters, I could feel my thoughts spiraling. Why did he give me this? What does he want? And yet, despite all my questions, a part of me smiled. Just a little. I closed the door to my tiny servant quarters and immediately dropped the package onto the bed like it might explode. I'd never received a gift in years, let alone something wrapped so neatly, carrying the scent of leather and newness. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled back the layers. Piece by piece, I pulled out each item. A crisp white long-sleeve shirt, slim-fit jeans, 2 expensive watches, designer loafers, and even cologne. My breath hitched. The fabric felt like clouds under my fingertips, soft, smooth, tailored for someone valuable. But then I saw it. Beneath the well-folded clothes was a soft silk fabric, pastel pink. I pulled it out in underwear. It was sleek, thin at the sides, smooth and fitted in a way that hugged skin perfectly. Then came the second one, black, mesh with small straps that almost made me drop it back on the bed. It was borderline scandalous. My cheeks flushed as my eyes darted around the room even though I was alone. What on earth was James thinking? Was this some kind of twisted joke? He hadn't laughed. He didn't even smirk when he handed me the package. He was calm, precise like always. But still pink? And whatever the other thing is. I folded the undergarments back quickly and tucked them beneath the box, shaking my head to clear the confusion. I wasn't ready to deal with whatever that was. Instead, I picked the white shirt and jeans. They fit me perfectly. When I stepped out into the hallway, even the air around me felt different. The shirt hugged my shoulders just right, and the jeans traced my legs like they had been stitched on me. I walked through the kitchen to pick up James's dinner, grilled salmon with herb rice and a tall glass of mint water, and all eyes turned. Especially the maid's. One nearly dropped her tray. Another blinked as though she couldn't recognize me. I wasn't sure if that made me nervous or proud. I walked through the mansion, head low but spine a little straighter than usual, and knocked gently on James's door. "Come in," came the familiar voice. I stepped inside, careful not to let the tray wobble, and froze. James stood near the window, dressed in nothing but a red silk robe. It draped loosely around him, showing the line of his toned chest, the faint trail of muscle disappearing beneath the robe's belt. His dark hair was slightly tousled like he had just run a hand through it, and the dim light of the chandelier bathed his skin like a spotlight. There was no way he was over 30. His kind of beauty existed only in those BL mangas Miriam used to read at night. I swallowed hard and approached, placing the tray on the table like it was the most important task in the world. Then, like always, I moved back and stood by the door. James didn't eat right away. Instead, he turned his head toward me. "Why do you always stand over there?" I blinked. "Sir?" He raised an eyebrow, then let out a faint chuckle. "What are you?" "My personal night watchman." A small laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. I covered my mouth quickly. "No, sir," I mumbled. He tilted his head slightly, eyes scanning me slowly. "You have a nice smile," he said. "You should show it more often." I felt the blush rise to my cheeks before I could stop it. Then he did something unexpected. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the bed. I blinked again. "Sit on the bed. I don't bite." I hesitated. But his tone wasn't harsh. It wasn't an order. So I moved slowly, my knees barely brushing the edge of the massive velvet-covered mattress as I sat, stiff like a statue. James picked up his fork and started eating, then paused and looked at me again. What was in the package? I listed them quickly. 2 shirts, 2 trousers, 2 watches, shoes and cologne. He arched an eyebrow. "Is that all?" My heart sank. "And underwear," I said, a bit embarrassed. He nodded, chewing slowly. Then his eyes pinned me. "Did you wear the one I picked?" My ears burned. "No, sir." His fork hit the plate gently as he stood. He walked toward me, slow, calculated, until he stood directly in front of me. The robe shifted slightly as he moved, and I fought hard not to look anywhere inappropriate. "I picked that for you," he said. "You don't disobey when I choose something for you." I dropped my eyes instantly. "I'm sorry, sir." For a moment he said nothing. I could feel the weight of his gaze drilling into the top of my head. Then he sighed. Maybe it was my face. Or maybe it was the way my shoulders were hunched with guilt. His tone softened. "Go put on the pink one and come back." I looked up, unsure if I heard him right. He was serious. And then he turned his back and walked toward his desk. I stood, nodded slightly and left the room, my heart racing. Back in my room, I stood in front of the mirror. The underwear clung to my fingers like silk. I hesitated. But there was no time for debate. I put it on. And though I felt exposed, awkward, and completely ridiculous, I made my way back down the hall, barefoot on the cold marble. James had told me to come back. And this time, I had no choice but to obey. The hallway felt colder than usual as I walked back to James' room, wearing nothing but the pale pink silk that clung tightly to my skin. Each step echoed on the marble floor, my heart thudding louder with every inch I moved closer to the master's door. I knocked once. "Come in," James' voice called out, calm and smooth. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. James was on the long, plush couch, watching something on his massive flat-screen TV. The lighting was soft and moody, casting a golden hue across the room. He didn't even look at me at first. He simply waved a hand toward the door and said, "Lock it." I hesitated for a split second, then turned the lock gently until it clicked. "Now come sit here close to me." My feet felt like stone as I walked over and sat down beside him. Not too close. Not too far. Just enough space to feel the heat of his bare chest through the open red robe he still wore. His cologne was subtle but intoxicating, and the rhythm of my breathing betrayed my nerves. What is he doing? Why am I here? The sound of the movie filled the silence between us. He turned his head slightly, finally glancing at me. "Relax," he said. "I don't bite." I gave a tiny nod, eyes focused on the screen. The movie played, something romantic, dramatic, far from the cold, corporate world James usually swam in. "I hate watching alone," he muttered suddenly, still watching the screen. "You know, it's not easy acting like I'm James all the time. Everyone fears me. Everyone expects the perfect business machine. But even machines get tired of being cold." His voice dropped a little. "Sometimes I just want someone warm." I didn't know what to say. I stayed quiet, unsure of where this was going. The movie reached a soft, tense kissing scene. Two men, both holding in years of emotion, finally gave in to the tension. It played slowly, too slowly. And that's when I felt James turn toward me again. "There's one way to make sure you and your father leave this place," he said, voice low, too calm. "But it depends on you." My throat dried. "You just have to be a good boy and warm my bed at night. I told you I'm not a fan of the cold," James said coolly. My heart dropped, then began racing. He leaned in slightly and gently placed his hand on the side of my neck, his fingers warm and smooth against my skin. "Perfect," he whispered, a small smile pulling at his lips. "Just the right temperature." I couldn't breathe properly. I sat still, stunned, unsure whether to run or freeze. My hands were clenched on my lap, but I was sure he noticed how fast my pulse was racing. He leaned back slightly, eyes still fixed on me. "Calm down," he said softly. "I'm not going to eat you." Then he added, "Take off your clothes." My eyes widened slightly, but I stood. Every part of me screamed uncertainty. But my body moved on its own, not from desire but from the heavy weight of fear, of confusion, and obligation. My hands reached for the buttons of the white shirt. One by one they slipped open. The room was silent except for the low hum of the movie and the thudding of my heart. I was no longer the invisible servant at that moment. I was something else. And I wasn't sure whether that was the beginning of something deeper, darker, and more twisted than I could have ever imagined. I stood quietly as the last button fell to the floor. My shirt slid from my shoulders. All that was left was the pink underwear. Soft, clinging, and humiliating. James' eyes traced me slowly, carefully, as though he were studying a painting, one that now belonged to him. I felt exposed, but I didn't move. If this was what would save my father, if this would earn my freedom, then so be it. James stepped closer. His red robe hung loose around him, exposing more of his toned chest, the line of muscle stretching just beneath his skin. He smiled and his voice dropped to something softer. "You're very cute," he said. "And your eyes, they carry too much pain for someone so young." I didn't know what to say. I just closed my eyes, trying to forget where I was. I felt his hand first, warm, confident, exploring. Then a soft kiss landed on my lips. "I don't usually kiss people I don't feel things for," he whispered against my ear. But then he did. He kissed me again, slower, deeper, and I knew something had changed in that moment. Whether I wanted it to or not, a piece of me had been claimed. The night passed in silence. Tension, unspoken emotions, and far too much confusion. When I left his room, it was some minutes past 2 a.m. in the morning. The hallways were dark and silent, the entire mansion sleeping. My feet moved like they were made of stone. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I collapsed onto my bed, the scent of James' cologne still clinging to me like smoke. I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, so this is how it begins. Because it wasn't just a one-time thing. James never made promises, but he never pushed me away either. And somewhere between his commands and those slow-burning glances, I began to fall for him. Miriam noticed my sudden change. She always noticed the things others didn't. One afternoon, she found me by the garden fence, trimming the bougainvillea flowers like a robot. She stood beside me, silent for a while, then said gently, "You've changed." I didn't respond. "You walk lighter now," she added. "But your eyes, they carry heavier secrets." I glanced at her. "I'm fine, Miriam." She narrowed her eyes, not believing a word. "Be careful, Jake. When the rich get bored, they don't just forget people like us. They do worse things." I tried to smile. I really did. But the knot in my chest tightened. Miriam wasn't wrong. She'd been in that mansion longer than I had. She had seen too many things, people who shined too brightly for a moment and were snuffed out just as quickly. I went back to my room that evening, her words echoing in my head like a broken record. "When James gets tired, what happens to me?" I lay on my bed and closed my eyes. I didn't want to feel guilty, but I did. I didn't want to feel attached, but I was. And no matter how hard I tried to forget it, I couldn't stop thinking. Some days later, a new guy was recruited to work in the Eduardo mansion. He walked like a breeze through the mansion halls, calm, handsome, and quietly observant. I noticed him the first day. There was something gentle about him. Something that wasn't common in this place filled with pride and punishment. His smile was soft and his eyes held kindness. And for a moment, I wondered what life would have been like if I had met him outside these gold-plated prison walls. His name is William. He helped me once when I almost fainted from cleaning too long under the sun. He didn't say much. He just handed me water and carried the remaining tools I had dropped. He didn't know who I was to James. He didn't know the secrets behind the silk sheets of the master's room. To him, I was just Jake, the quiet guy who did too much work and smiled too little. And slowly he started getting close. He started waiting for me outside the pantry. Sometimes he would help me carry trays up the staircase, slipping in a quiet joke that actually made me laugh. Something about him made me feel seen. And that was the problem. Because James saw it too. It happened one evening. James had just come back from a long meeting. The car rolled into the driveway and the usual staff stood waiting. But this time, before I could even move, William stepped forward and took James' briefcase with a smile. James didn't say a word. His eyes met mine, and they said everything. Later that night, I overheard the whispers. Miriam had said it before, James doesn't like to share. So when I found out James had summoned William to his private lounge, the same place where he smoked and brooded, I knew something was coming. I crept down the hallway, heart pounding, and stood behind the half-closed door. Their voices weren't loud, but I could make out every word. "Why are you so kind to him?" James asked, low and cold. William didn't flinch. "Jake stole my heart," he said without hesitation. My stomach turned. William continued, "He reminds me of who I was before life hardened me. There's something broken in him. But it's beautiful." James didn't say a word. Not even when William listed what he liked about me, my eyes, my silence, my strength despite everything. William spoke with honesty and sincerity. But I knew what that meant. He had just fed fire to the devil. "Leave," James said at last, his voice like ice cracking under pressure. I bolted before William could come out. Back in my room, I couldn't sleep. I knew James would come for me. I could feel it in my chest, a storm brewing. Not lust, not passion. Just fury. So I did what I always did when the rules of power called. I slipped into the silky black mesh he had given me weeks ago. I adjusted myself, fixed my hair, and walked like a lamb toward the lion's den. I knocked once. No answer. The door was unlocked. Inside, James sat on the bed, flipping through a magazine. The moment he noticed me, he didn't say anything. Then he stood. He walked slowly toward me, stopping just inches away. "You're lucky," he said quietly, eyes searching mine. "You already have someone who loves you." The words sank in, not like comfort but like poison. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Please, don't hurt William." The air changed. James' expression twisted. His jaw clenched. And just like that, the storm broke loose. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He punished me. Not with words, but with actions. That night, James was no longer the quiet, intense man I had come to secretly crave. He was filled with fury. And I was the outlet for it all. No gentle touches, no teasing and no emotion. Just control. When he was done, I couldn't stop the tears. Not because of the physical pain, but because something in me had cracked. James stood at the edge of the room, back turned to me. Then, without looking, he said, "Get out. And don't come back." My legs were barely holding me up, but I did as he said. Back in my room, I closed the door softly, sat down on the bed, and let the silence consume me. I had no strength left to cry. My body ached, but the ache in my chest was worse. James had touched me in every way a person could be touched. Yet I had never felt so alone. And the worst part? I still wanted him. Even now. The days that followed were empty. James stopped speaking to me. He stopped calling for me at night. He didn't even look at me when I passed by. He had turned into a shell of himself, colder, harder, completely locked away from the world. Even the staff noticed. The once feared but calculated master of the house now moved like a ghost, sharp, unreadable, and distant. But I knew why. It was because of me. Because I had asked him not to hurt someone else, instead of choosing him. And so, I chose silence. I stopped seeing William altogether. The boy with the soft eyes and kind smile had been my comfort during the hardest night of my life. When I could barely walk, when my back burned with bruises and my voice trembled, William had stayed close, helping me clean my wounds in secret. He never said a word. Just listened, supported, and stayed. But I pushed him away too. It's better this way. I told him one afternoon, not meeting his eyes. Don't worry about me anymore. He looked at me like I had just slapped him. But he didn't argue. He just nodded. It didn't take long before Mrs. Rodriguez noticed. Of course, she had long suspected something was wrong in her home. You could never really hide secrets from a woman like her. Not one with eyes as sharp as knives and a presence that commanded silence. She summoned me to her private chambers. The moment I stepped in, the air changed. Thick, watchful, and intimidating. She didn't smile nor ask me to sit. "Tell me the truth," she said. And I did. I told her everything. About James, about the nights, the punishments, the quiet suffering. About William. About how it all began. She didn't react at first. She stood still, eyes focused, lips slightly pursed. The only thing she did was breathe deeply. Then she walked over to her drawer and pulled out an envelope. It was thick with cash. Neatly packed. "You're leaving," she said, handing it to me. I looked up, startled. "What about my father?" "You didn't complete your years of service," she said simply. "The agreement was 10. You've served 4. I held the envelope tightly. So, that was it. No more bargaining. No more second chances. No more James. And the rest of my father's punishment? He stays," she said sharply. "You're not allowed in this household anymore. And for the sake of William, who has nothing to do with this twisted drama, it's best you disappear." There was no hatred in her tone. Just calculation. This was business to her. And maybe, a broken mother protecting her broken son. I went back to my tiny room and began to pack. There wasn't much. Just 2 shirts, a worn-out notebook, a gift Miriam had given me once. A little wooden figurine shaped like a dove. I clutched it tightly. As I walked toward the main gate, the sun setting behind the golden mansion walls, Miriam ran to me. Her arms wrapped around me tightly, tears falling from her eyes. "I told you to be careful," she whispered. "You were right, Miriam. I'm sorry." She pressed something into my hand, a bracelet. Handmade, woven with red and gold thread. I smiled through the ache in my chest. Then I turned only to see William walking toward me. His face was clouded with guilt. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never meant to step over boundaries. I didn't know." "It's fine, William," I replied. His hand brushed against mine, and for a moment I thought he might ask me to stay. But he didn't. He knew better. This house was never mine to belong to. As I walked out of the Eduardo estate for the last time, I didn't look back. The city disappeared behind me as I boarded a bus to my hometown, a place I hadn't seen since I was 17. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in years, I wasn't bound by gold walls or silent nights. I was free, but still worried about my father. And somewhere deep inside me, I still hoped James Rodriguez would remember the boy he once asked to smile more often. The smell of wet earth filled the air. The fields behind my father's old house had grown wild during the years we were gone, But with time, care, and sweat, I started taming them again. I spent my mornings under the sun, planting and watering, growing things for the first time in a long while. For once, life was quiet. I could hear the birds again. I could feel the breeze without it being laced with fear or tension. I tried to move on. Tried to forget James. The money Mrs. Rodriguez had given me was enough to build something better, a small farm, maybe even a new roof, but I used only what I needed and left the rest tucked away. I didn't want a rich man's pity. I wanted a simple life. A peaceful one. Then one afternoon, I saw a sleek black car parked just outside my father's home. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But when the car door opened and I saw James step out, my breath caught in my chest. He was impeccably dressed as always. But there was something softer about his eyes this time. Something less guarded. I stood frozen on the porch, clutching my hoe like a shield. When he walked up, I quickly bowed my head. "Why did you leave like that?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "Why didn't you say goodbye?" I didn't know how to respond. I didn't have the courage. I said honestly, "I thought it would hurt less that way." James sighed and looked away. "You really matter to me, Jake. I've just been trying to hide it." My heart thudded. He looked back at me serious. "Come back to the mansion. Let's start over." My chest tightened. "I'll consider it," I said, then paused and looked him straight in the eye. "But only if you release my father." He went quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "If that's what it takes, I'll do it." 2 days later, there was a soft knock on my door. I wiped my hands on my old trousers and walked over, not expecting much. When I opened the door, I froze. It was my father. His hair had thinned more and he looked tired, but his eyes still held that quiet warmth I remembered from when I was a child. His hands trembled as they reached for me. "Jake," he whispered. "Dad." We both cried. No words could explain the ache, the lost years, the quiet sacrifices. We just stood there in the doorway, holding each other as the evening sun painted golden streaks over the fields. Later that day, James returned. He stood at the edge of the porch, hands in his pockets, watching us quietly. "I'm not here to pressure you," he said when I stepped out to meet him. "I just wanted you to have this time with your father. You deserve it." He handed me a small black envelope. Inside was a deed and a check. "A new home," he said. I looked up at him, unable to stop the smile breaking through my tears. "Why are you doing this?" James exhaled. "Because when I finally let myself care, it was for you." I didn't say anything. I just stepped forward and hugged him. It was pure, honest, and quiet. That day something changed in me. For the first time, I wasn't a prisoner or a servant or a guilty son trying to pay off a debt. I was just Jake. And I was finally free. Please like and subscribe for more interesting BL stories. Thanks for watching.